Hello, everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership at Heart podcast. And today I am so tickled to have KeyAnna Schmiedl on. I saw her out in the social space, actually on Instagram a couple times, and she works at an organization that I highly respect. I've been to their conference a couple times. I know she'll tell you a little bit more about that, but I just had to have her on. The light that was there, her philosophy that was there, I just wanted to bring her up into the surface into the world. So welcome, KeyAnna.
Well, thank you so much. And I mean, my goodness, I feel like now I take a deep breath because we're at the surface. We're going to have a conversation that will go deep and come back up. So I'm so excited. Thank you.
So tell everybody where you are right now in your leadership journey.
Sure. So for me in my leadership journey, I think I have to tell you where I'm at, the organization that I'm with, so that you understand what this journey has been. So currently, I am the Chief Human Experience Officer at Workhuman. And I say the title to you because where I'm at in my journey is really wanting to just embody and empower this idea of the working experience for people being so crucial to business success and really figuring out how do we make it a better working experience for people. And so I am absolutely thrilled and honored to have the opportunity to say what I'm focusing on right now is the human experience within Workhuman, but then also because of the organization that we are, the thought leadership that we put out there, the promising practice that we try to instill, it is learning as we go to say, and we can impact the working experience of everybody that we come in contact with.
I love that so much. I think about, oh gosh, oh, Claude Silver and the Chief Heart Officer, and thinking about like the different roles and how things are evolving at work, and also how this concept of coming to the surface with culture and the need to kind of it's like not a nice to have, it's an imperative. We can't continue to put it side of desk or on the back. It has to be the thing we lead with, not just for differentiation, but when we think of employer brand and what we stand for, right, out in
That's
the
right.
world generally, I think is big. So, yeah, I really appreciate that new way or that different way of thinking about even just your title and what your focus is. I think every organization needs it, and there might be a whole bunch of people that are not titled that way that might be at work doing some of that work the best they can. But I love that when you stamp it that way, it really says like we prioritize this, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think too, listen, I have been lucky enough throughout my career where I've had the opportunity to also create my own titles. And the one that I would say that I last created that I was most proud of was leading culture and inclusion. And it's because I think you still needed to call out inclusion as something that we need to do, that we need to be aware of. But the idea of leading culture is really how do you take this concept that feels amorphous and intangible and say, here are all of the things that contribute into this. And if you're saying that you lead culture, what you're also saying is, I should care about absolutely everything that's happening within this organization because that informs the culture, right? And so it also allows you to be part of these conversations and show up and ask questions in ways that are both unexpected, but also drive a slightly different version of the conversation that everybody's used to having. And I love the discovery that comes out of that because there's only so much that I know that I will ever be able to bring to the table. And so I am naturally a curious person, and I want to know if I pose a question that I think about often to a colleague of mine who doesn't think about it all that often, what is that natural inclination in their response? And what does that bring that maybe catalyzes a more tangible answer that then we can go action on together? And I know I've got somebody who's bought in, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think when you think about titles, it's really meant to convey to folks where should you show up and what should you be there to care about. And so being here with the Chief Human Experience title, I'm like, I care about the human experience. I care about all the stuff, right? And so here we go. So I really love the idea that organizations now, especially coming out of the really intense periods around the pandemic, although we're not fully through it yet, people have really, to your point, talked about culture, talked about all of these things that used to be thought of as soft skills as now a critical piece of what leaders need to have, of what organizations need to care about, and what companies will be held accountable to.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. I am Curious to know, where does your drive to lead come from?
So I don't know if there is a right answer to this question, but what I will tell you is this will maybe seem like it's out of left field for some folks and maybe seem all too familiar for other folks. I am a Black woman who grew up in a mostly white town. And I remember from a young age being in school and being labeled difficult when I disagreed, that not every Black woman in the book looked like my mom, not like just normal things that I'm like, no, that doesn't look like my mom. And it's like, yes, yes, it does. You're being difficult. And I'm like, how is that a reasonable response? I know what my mom looks like. Go to the principal's office, right? So like it would be scenarios like that where I'm like, but this is absurd. You need to explain to me why you feel comfortable telling me what is or isn't true about my experience, about how I relate to certain things, or how you believe I should relate to certain things. And that is a form of leadership, right? Questioning authority in many ways is a form of leadership, but doing so in a way that comes from, I'm not just trying to agitate, I'm trying to understand. And so I think my drive for leadership really comes from this place of, I'm trying to understand. Why does it work this way? Are you aware that that then means that it works for some, it doesn't work for all? And for me, it's trying to surface the pieces that then say, well, we then have a decision to make. We have enough information to say we have a decision to make. And ultimately, at the end of the day, in some cases, I may not own all of the decisions, but I own making sure you know what we're actually deciding. And a lot of times, what we're deciding is, are we saying it's okay for certain groups to be successful? Are we saying it's okay for business outcomes to outweigh the experience that people have? And if we can all surface this information and have a conversation about it and land in a place where we all feel confident going back out to the people and explaining things to them, then fine. But I don't know that those are always conversations that are had because they feel like you're challenging a status quo in a way that's just uncomfortable. And because I don't necessarily have an agenda behind it, right? Like, not in all of these cases do I have an answer, but I wanted to understand why my sixth grade teacher thought that they could tell me that somebody in a book did look like my mom. And when I explained to them, nope, because my mom wears her hair straight and she's not that dark and she's not, and I'm giving them information and they're like, well, now you're just being difficult, right? Like where does that come from? What is that about? And why is it okay for me to then walk around with this label when in actuality, like that shouldn't have been the outcome? So it's really this drive of, have we had the right conversation? Have we surfaced the often unthought of questions? And once we've done that, do we feel comfortable now, each of us as leaders, going out and delivering this message? And if the answer is no to any of those, then you have more work to do. And I love the more work to do because I don't know what I don't know, but I'd like to find out.
Yeah, I love that curiosity. That curiosity. I feel like curiosity. If we really get down to just everything that's happening in the world, curiosity is probably the thing that solves it all. I think about just the divisiveness and just all the things, right? And it's like if we could just lean in with more true curiosity, not fake curiosity, that level of genuineness to really understand. And I
Yeah.
always say, like, understanding is not agreement. And I think that's so important to in our world to know that it's okay to understand another human. It doesn't mean you're agreeing with their position. It
That's
doesn't.
right.
And so I love this thing that you're bringing forward right now. I think it's important, and an awareness of how we put people in boxes, I think, is another thing that we get. Because if we're not curious, we are always going to put people in the box. It's more comfortable. It's just more efficient to put people in the box.
And I
So
don't think
yeah.
that we've always acknowledged the ways that being able to neatly put people into boxes actually does a disservice to everyone, right? So I'm married to a white guy who was raised Jewish, and I've been with him now for over 20 years. And the conversations that we've had over those 20 years, they are so much more mature now than than they were back in the day. But it's also just the, oh, well, I had some preconceived notions about you based on how you grew up, based on who your parents are, based on that. Then I was then assuming this is how you would operate in certain scenarios. These would be things that you were comfortable or uncomfortable with. And the amount of unlearning that box that I had to do was more surprising to me
Mm,
where I was predicting you're going to have to learn all of this stuff about me and in my Black experience.
hmm.
But I was not predicting that I was going to need to learn about him and his experience because I'm like, well, I grew up around a bunch of you, right? And so
Mhm.
that's something that I put out there because I'm like, look, this works both ways. And it's one of the reasons why I say like bias works, it's not positive or negative,
Yep.
right? It's really how you use it for or against a certain group. And in
Yep.
many ways for me, some of that learning and some of that boxing was for me a revelation of like, oh, and here's how I box people and here's how I do this, and not necessarily here's what I need to teach people and push outward. It's also what I need to bring inward.
So true. One of the things I struggle with, so kind of going off what you were just saying about your husband is, so my mom is white and Jewish, and my dad is Black and Christian, and I was raised a Reformed Jew and converted to Catholicism. So can you imagine looking like me and people making all kinds of assumptions, looking just like
Mhm.
me, looking at me, assuming all of my things, the politics, everything, having no clue. And the thing is, I think we do this period. I just with everyone, like irrespective if it's a Black woman, Black man, like you were just saying, I'm a white guy. Oh yeah, but then I'm Jewish. Oh yeah, and then I'm adopted. Oh yeah, and then I'm a vet. Oh yeah, and then I'm like there's all these things and there's these levels.
Yes.
And if we don't do what you're talking about again initially, if we aren't curious to peel to kind of say who is this person at the person's core and what are all the levels, we won't find the intersection points. We won't find the connection points that can bring us together. We're just going to always be dividing because we're going to be so comfortable putting people in the boxes, you
Well,
know?
and I think too, then it's also the like, well, what box are you choosing? Or can we combine these boxes? And I'm like, can we just stop talking about the boxes? So your example of Christian and Jewish and Catholic. So at our house, we celebrate Shaka Hanukkah, and it's Christmas and Hanukkah because we did Black Christmas and it wasn't like anybody else's Christmas. And his family was bringing Hanukkah traditions. And so we said Shaka Hanukkah. And one year I bought a big wreath to put on the door, and I bought 3 Franklin dolls, Franklin from the Peanuts cartoon, and I put them in there. And I was like, look, I made a wreath of Franklins for Shaka Hanukkah. And it's like, we're just going to make our own thing. This is what we're going to do.
Exactly.
And I think, especially having kids, but also as a
Yes.
leader, I want people to feel comfortable with the spaces where it's like, it's okay. You also don't have to
Yep.
always have a box that fits, right?
Yep.
You can create your own thing. You can say, hey, help me figure this out. And what I'm afraid of when we don't ask questions is that one, the fear of looking stupid is actually an incredibly scary thing to me. But then two, that we are afraid to ask for help. And so one of our board members here actually wrote a book about this loneliness epidemic and all these things. And it was a concept that really struck me during the pandemic of just like,
Mhm.
I feel like community is so important. And I didn't realize how much I was relying on acquaintances in my day-to-day interactions until all of a sudden you don't have those anymore. Right.
Mhm.
And so it's what is real meaningful connection about? And to me, it's where are the places where you feel comfortable being vulnerable? Because that's how you build real connection. So if you're afraid to ask for help, you're not going to be able to build a true connection with someone because they don't really know who you are and where they can fit in and kind of dock in with you. And so I think like some of these concepts have creeped into work, right? And so people, especially for those of us privileged enough to have been able to work from home or other places during the pandemic, and for those of us who have come back into a workplace setting of some sort, it's well, how do we do this togetherness again? And there's a certain amount of, I have to be honest, like fakeness that existed in the before time that, a critical threshold of people have said, I'm not interested in that. And that has to be okay. But that is very different to then say is allowed or encouraged or supported at work.
So true. Yeah. I do think that's interesting. My husband and I were just saying this the other day that it's like when we're so used to what happened during the pandemic where we weren't seeing people or interacting with people, or we had put processes and systems in place to not have to interact with people for safety, right? but safety, not just physical safety, but like as we think through it, it's like, ooh, you and me, ooh, you and me getting too close. Ooh, you're seeing me too much. I see you too much. We're seeing through to each other too much. So now we go to the airport and we go up to a lady at this counter. Okay, so she's an employee of an airline, and we go to this lady at a counter, and we're like wanting to talk to her and like ask her questions. She's like, "Oh, let's take you over to this kiosk," and we're like, "No, no, no. We came to you because you're a human, and we
Mm-hmm.
actually would like to interact with you." And it's like, huh? What? You want to actually interact? So that is that whole the experience officer, the
Yeah.
humanness, the heart, all these things are so needed because it got where things got better, it got worse. So for a while I
Well,
was
I
saying it
mean,
got better, and
but
now
this
it
was
just got worse again.
happening even before the pandemic, right? Like, so I think about um, call centers and service centers where you would call in. And at first, it was like humans are the friction. It takes too long to get somebody on the phone. And if I just had an automated system where I could press a 2 for this and a 3 for this and a 4 for send, then I'm good. And then what happened? People started posting online these cheat codes of like, here's how you can immediately get through the like menu of options and straight to a person, right? Because people were like, well, my challenge is a bit unique and I'm not sure if it falls into option 1 or option 2. And I feel like if I could just explain it to someone. And so I think really one of the pieces that I'm interested in is this idea of, as we continue to have our tech evolve and all these things, generative AI, all of this stuff, at the core, are we saying that human interaction is a friction? Or are we saying that it's not? Like, and is it an or, right? Could it be more frictionless? What helps us to get to the human interaction that says this was worth my time? Because I think we've had a mix of those, like, this was worth my time. None of us could have attended this meeting and it would have been worth everybody's time to not be there, right? Like, you have these mixed interactions. And so part of what I think the role of leaders, especially in the people space, but I will tell you, any leader, is to figure out where is that friction zone between it was really valuable to interact with another human being versus it actually got in the way here. And if we can figure that out, and if we can say, Gen AI, you take this piece that made it full of friction, and then we keep the humanity there, I think we'll be in a really nice spot. I think we would be in a spot where we're talking about burnout less. I think we would be in a spot where we could actually redefine, should work be our identities anymore? And we've just sort of morphed into this place where I'll tell you, when I have to think about, well, if you weren't doing this, what would you do? Or if you won the lottery
Mhm.
tomorrow, I can't imagine myself not working in some capacity. And it's because it's a critical part of how I identify. But I don't know that that's necessarily good, right? Like, I don't
Mhm.
know that
Mhm.
when my mom was working more of the 9 to 5 and able to come home and shut off because work didn't come home with her, she was so engaged in play and all of these amazing things. And that's what I remember growing up. And for my kids, I sit there and I have one of them who had said to me a couple months ago, he was like, Mom, I want you to watch this, but I want you to put your phone down.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay. And he's like, I know that you can watch me and have your phone, but I want you to just watch me and not have your phone.
Mhm.
And I'm like, man, that sucks. Because I've also been conditioned to multitask and do all of these things well and say, here's what I can give back to you. And I know I heard it. And I, even though I was doing two things, and I don't know that this is necessarily how it should be, but I know that we also don't have the capacity to figure out what it could be right now. And that's where I would really like for us to be able to spend some time.
Mm. Or whenever you want to spend that time, I'll spend it with you because it's worth
Great.
spending the time in that space. That really is. Let's get this right one way or another. I know this, part of this is a subjective experience, and it does have so much to do with our filters and our own backgrounds. And so figuring out how we can have that discussion, bringing our full selves, and it's still having a level of remaining objective in the process, so we can come up with something that can work for the masses, and so scaling it and for long term. I think would be something I would be 100% interested in for sure.
Right. Well, and I mean, and also being able to articulate that to another person so that they then have a better sense of, okay, here's then how we can connect. Here's how I understand you, not just how you like to work, but how you like to be in a
Hmm.
space. Right. And then I can say, okay, well, here's how that calibrates against how I like to be in a space. And here's the happy medium. And here's where I'm going to need you to be psychologically brave. And here's where I'm going to need to be psychologically brave so that we create this space together. And
Yes.
I'm very interested in once we're able to merge that with and the work that needs to get done, I think we'll be in a really amazing space.
Mm. Love it, love it, love it. Just you're filling me up right now, just so you know, KeyAnna. So all right. So now is that time. I want you to bring a story or be thinking about a story, a time when, so this is called Leadership with Heart. I write about caring leadership and belonging and listening, and I speak on that. So I would like to hear about a time for you when maybe you didn't feel like you showed up as a leader with heart. Like what happened in the moment? What maybe went wrong? What was it, something that slipped? And then what for you kind of was a aha or the enlightening moment that helped you see your way through? And I don't mean like see your way through and now you're some perfect person, because none of us are, but that just more enlightened, where you just felt like, okay, I'm a little bit more proud now of myself because I was able to get through it.
Yeah. So listen, I might kind of summarize it all up as a time in my life where I prioritized being nice without realizing that wasn't kind. So the story that I have in my head is I was managing a team of people, and I was actually working with someone who I knew very well. We had been peers at a prior place in our lives, and I also had historically like looked up to them. And so I thought getting this person on my team was amazing. And it was one of those moments of like, and they'll probably show me up and people will realize like maybe we made a mistake here, and that would be fine. I would be okay with it. But as we were doing the work, I realized the way that they were working in the organization that we were working in was not gelling very well. And we would have conversations about this and where can I support them as a leader to remove some of the friction? Where can I clarify for them? Here's what I think we need to focus on. And it's okay that we're not boiling the ocean over here. I think we can get there over time. And we were having these conversations constantly. And what I was realizing was twofold. One, I don't know that they're happy here and potentially doing this work. And I don't know that the work that I need to get done can be done by them.
Mm.
But the conversations that I was having with them was more of that, here's what you're doing really well. Because I was like strengths-based leadership, right? And I still believe in strengths-based leadership, but also because I had so much respect for them, I didn't feel that I could tell them, and here's what I think you need to work on, or here's what I think is not working, or let's have a conversation. Are you even happy? And so eventually we had that discussion because one day in a meeting, it was just very obvious and the other team members were noticing. And I just asked them flat out, are you happy here? And they said, no, I don't think this is what I want to be doing. And I said, okay, I feel like that's been the case for a while. And they said, that's true. And I said, so should we partner on what a plan might look like for you to either be doing this work somewhere else or for you to be doing something different somewhere else? And then you saw this lift and you saw like certain things were moving forward, but also it was like, and we have a plan for, but also because we have a plan and we're talking about, all right, so you're going to start looking for roles now. And we're going to, that we were also able to like bring in other folks to do the work, have them be cross-trained a bit. Like it all ended up working out, but what I will tell you, my boss at the time would tell you is that it took me a long time, a longer time than they would have liked for me to figure that out. And the reason why I say it's about being nice and not kind is because kindness is saying, I care enough about you to tell you honestly, how do I think it's going? Where do I think your strengths are? Yes, but also what do I think your opportunity areas are? And how realistic is it that I, as your leader, can help you to close them? How critical is it or not for you to have to close them? And if you think about your career in a linear fashion, you're limiting so many of your options. If you think about a career as a rock wall, then you have more opportunities for, well, what if you slid over here and did something slightly different and then combined these skills and brought them back together? And so it was literally from that one kind of scenario that played out over several months and those series of conversations that I was like, it doesn't help anybody when I don't tell them what I'm really thinking. It also doesn't help them when I don't tell them, look, I'm sensing X, but I don't know. And so I have some questions for you. And it kind of broke this shield of leaders always have the answer, or they'll only come to you once they have an answer and all of that. And it's completely kind of turned on its head the way that I think about leadership. And it's also what made me consider maybe I could be a leader and maybe I could be a leader at a different level.
Wow. That's amazing. So that's a really good awakening, I think. You know, sometimes the idea of like perfection, or you have to like never make mistakes, or you never have to always see everything that's coming, and you have, like that, you know, it's just so ridiculous. We do put on our bat capes here and there, you know, occasionally, don't we? And
Well, it's also something that I realized like, oh, it's because this is a point of pride for me, right? Like I am really proud of I typically look at things as a prism. Like I will tell people I'm a systems thinker. I look at all of these different angles and I'm able to do that pretty quickly and then come up with, but it's those moments where I feel like I've done that and I'm still pretty stuck, or I feel like I started that and I don't know what the other angles are for me to consider, that are really scary moments. And I thought you needed to have less of those to then say confidently, I'm a leader. And I was like, wow, this is a joke. And I will tell you the other thing that I learned was how many people that your organization has labeled as leaders don't have all the answers or don't think through all of the things. And they can still be successful. So I think it was just reshaping this idea of, is leadership a box or a mold? Or where can it look different and not be detrimental? And where are the places where it can't look different? I'm still figuring that out. But it's also like I mean, it literally changed so much about how I even physically show up at work. People around here will tell you I'm not wearing sneakers today. I usually do. So when I don't, I hear about it. But they're like, how many pairs of Nikes do you have? Oh my gosh, that color combination is wild. Wow, you're showing. And I was just like, yeah, I don't know. It just broke this idea in me that leadership behaves a certain way and that it looks a certain way in order to operate in a certain way.
Yeah, that's it. I think I love that lens, because as you think about those that we are expected to lead, they all show up differently. So why wouldn't we? I don't even know. Yeah. So I get you on that. They're like, it has to be this way. Sew it up. Da, da, da.
Yeah, it sounds like this and it looks like this. And you're like, but does it have to? And think like, I also think about those people and organizations who are real influencers, right? Like the person that maybe doesn't have a leadership title, but they are the person that people go to say, what do you think about this? Or how would you tackle this? Like it also then broke this idea of, just because of where you sit in the hierarchy of things, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a leader. Leader is how you show up, how you support your team. It's all of these behaviors. And I think the more people that get that, the more leaders will actually see in organizations.
That's what I took. My book a couple books ago was called The Art of Caring Leadership. And it was that kind of going back to what you said at the beginning of like, how do we take this thing that's kind of nebulous, that's like hard to put your arms around, and like make it something with, for most people, comfortable with some guardrails, some definitive things. And that was the effort in that book, was to do exactly that, was to say, here are the behaviors, here are examples of when it went well and those when it didn't. Some included me, some included others. A lot of people I've been interviewing for some years now on the show. And I do think that it feels better for organizations, for leaders, for humans to have something to point to say, I know what success like looks like. so
Yeah.
that I can go towards it. So I think it's, it's hard to live in a world that doesn't have any of that. And I think if we didn't have that, it could be interesting anyway.
Agree.
Because
Agree.
when we start to see how those things break down in society and all the stuff that happens, you're like, okay, wow, this is going off its rails. So having some of that is, is really helpful.
Well,
And so my
what's
attempt is
really
to do that
funny
too.
is that you said like having a starting point. And so apologies, podcast listeners, this is the place where you're going to be like, oh, she wanted to plant this line. I promise you I didn't. But this is where I was at. So I wasn't working at Workhuman yet, but I was at one of the Workhuman conferences. And Eric, the CEO, was on stage and he was talking about sometimes even when get like in moments of gratitude where you want to give recognition to someone, sometimes it can be hard to like start, especially if it's like I have a formalized program and this is going to go up on a company feed where anybody can see it. And it's like, how do I write it so that I sound smart and that it's hitting the right marks and all of these things? And so that was the impetus for this tool that they created, which was this idea of a blank page and just to be able to get you started, right? To like put in some prompts. And now you see people using AI to say, hey, I want to write a note that feels like this, but that has these key points in it, right? And as a starting point to then say, okay, and now I'm going to go and make it like human, make it seem like
Mm-hmm.
it's coming from me. And I think it, I can't say that I would tell you I'm always learning. And so if you ask me like where I'm at on my leadership journey, I would tell you I'm still learning. I don't know where I'm at on that journey. I don't think I'm anywhere near the end of being like, and here's my sage wisdom and advice. But I do think that having certain people to look at and say, ooh, I really liked how they did this, or I really hated when they did this, has helped me to consider in certain moments, like, how do I want to show up and what feels authentic to how I would show up. I tell people all the time, I had this amazing manager, I will tell you, she was a leader, where just genuinely the way that she cared about her team and the way that she would be able to very quickly like come out of a training session. How do you think you did in there? The first leader who had ever asked me, like, started with, how do I think that I did? To then be able to calibrate, I agree with you. I think you did this really well, or I think you're being too hard on yourself here, or one of the things you missed. I will tell you as a trainer, I was so excited about getting in the room. And I'd come out and she's like, how do you think you did? And I'm like, I think I did better this time with this and this. And she's like, yeah, you did improve in all those areas. Thing you keep missing, you keep forgetting to introduce yourself to the people. And I'm like, damn, sometimes it's the simple things that you miss when you're focused on like, but I want to get the concepts and I want to do all the, and she was really great at the simple things. She was really great at, here's how I show you I care about you. And that's something where I know I have not nailed that, but I know it is such a big unlock for leaders. And that is where I go, like, when I have time to reflect, I'm like, what are the little things that I could be doing on a regular basis that I know make a difference in the long run, and I'm just not doing them consistently enough.
So true. And I think, and that's, I think people like you and I who are kind of in the space and seeing where it goes well and where it doesn't, it kind of provides us a medium to impart that knowledge. Like this podcast is a part of that, right? It's like, what are the different mediums that people are going to be taking in? There's the talks, there's the podcasts, there's the books, there's articles, there's so many things that you can do so that we can kind of impact people through what we learn. It's not like, oh, I am so intelligent and it's all inside of me. I naturally have that. It's not that. It's like I have so much exposure to all this stuff, and we've got to spread this about, right?
Yeah.
That's what I love.
Yeah.
That's what I loved from day one with Workhuman is it was like, this is not just a software platform. In fact, they rarely even mention that part when they're talking about all these other things, right? And I think I love that idea, that branding of we really stand for this thing and this is what we're going to be in a like the biggest boldest way we can be. And I think like that's what I appreciated, and which I appreciated about you. I think you align very well with our brand. But being that way, I feel is much better than saying, here's my product or service. Because if they love what you stand for, that other stuff's just going to come. They're going to want to be a part of all the things you produce because of what you stand for.
Yeah.
So
And I listen, like, on my journey to coming to Workhuman, I had exposure similar to you, had been to some of the conferences, all of these things. But it's like, even when I was at an organization where we were onboarding the platform, I'm not a super emotive person, especially at work. And they showed us, like it was this life events, and it was how in the workplace, people were being celebrated for things that were happening for them outside of work. And I just remember getting so emotional because I have worked at places before where I was like, I don't think these people care at all about me when I am not swiped in for the day and after I swipe out, right? Like, I don't even know that they know that I'm a human being outside of here. And then I was working at another place where I had helped to create this tool that we call the bias analyzer tool. And it was, built into performance reviews. And the idea is, if you really want to impact pay for performance and equitable pay, you have to take bias out of performance reviews. It's just natural. And at the same time that I was building this tool here at Workhuman, they were building, they had much kinder branding. They called it the inclusion advisor. And I'm like, dang, really could have called it an inclusion advisor. But the idea was, in moments of recognition, you could be biased. There could be patterns of, you really only recognize the, let's go with a generic one, the women on your team for the collaborative work, but you really celebrate the men on the team for the independent accomplishments. And then what does that do to your organization? And it's just this idea that, for me personally, being here, but also then being part of an organization that says, these are the things that we care. This is the way that we want to work on these challenges, or we want to consider these things. Again, as somebody who prides themselves on being a systems thinker, I'm like, yes, looking at what can improve the working experience from all of these different angles. Like, I am so, again, lucky and privileged to be here, to be able to say, we get to ask these questions, and we know that as an organization, we get to care about them. And so even if not our product, even if it's the thought leadership or, some of the data that we put out there with Workhuman IQ or some of these other pieces, even if that just sparks a, hey, we could have the same conversation, right? Like, if all you need is somebody to say it's a conversation worth having, which was why I was also so excited to be on this podcast, right? Because like, I think what you're doing with this podcast is saying, this is a conversation worth having, that then gives people permission to then say, all right, well, then I'm going to go have it. I'm going to get started somewhere. And that's all I want, is that people feel like they're in organizations where they can have a conversation that's worth having, and that they feel like they can get started somewhere.
Love, 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 love. Okay, so for those who are listening right now, and they might be, let's say, at a crossroads in their leadership, they could be at a place where just they need some extra oomph, or they're trying to figure out, how do I find my own unique me inside of this bigger organization? What might be a couple pearls of wisdom you'd leave them with?
So I'll tell you, if I have any ethos, it's to lead with authenticity, transparency, and humility. And so I think it's finding that voice that is authentically you. And I will tell you, I'm not going to judge you if you're borrowing somebody else's voice for a while until you figure it out, if you're trying on a few until you find the one that fits. But I will tell you that people know when you're being authentic versus when you're not. And so that's where I think transparency is helpful, to be able to say, listen, we're having this conversation as a leadership team, and we discussed, aligned, committed to these things, but team, here's where I'm struggling a bit with the information needed to carry this out, right? Like, I'm going to need your support here, because this is the piece that isn't fully making sense for me. And I believe we're critical in delivering this to the organization. I'll have conversations like that with my team. And that's the last piece, the humility piece, right? I believe that if you are going to lead a team, the people on your team, whether it's down lanes of subject matter expertise or generalists, it should feel like iron sharpens iron. And I want to be able to go to that, because if it's just me by myself, I might get some things right, but I'm going to get a lot more things wrong. I truly believe in collective genius. I truly believe that I do not need to be the smartest person in the room. And I believe that there are going to be people who are always closer to the delivery of the work than I am if I'm sitting up here. And so I need to know from them, how is it going? What's going on? To be able to inform then, oh, well, then actually with this information, I think we need to reconsider this. And to then be able to go back to my peers to say, here's the information that I didn't have at the time. I want to put this forward because I do think then it's worth reconsidering. Or I just want to make sure that, and now we're back where we started, which was not planned, but I want to make sure that now, given this information, and we look across, do we still feel like this is the same decision to make? So I would say just how can you, as often as possible, feel like you can authentically be you, that you can be transparent in a way that's authentic to you, and that you can be vulnerable in showing that humility of, I feel pretty confident I know this, I know I don't know this, and here's how I'm going to create the plan to go find that out.
I love that. Going back to, like you said, curiosity in the end. If you're not curious about the other person's position, where they're coming from, what they need, what they bring to the table, if you don't have that, you have nothing. We really have nothing without curiosity. So I appreciate you bringing it to the front. And I am so glad that I asked and that you promptly said yes.
Same, same.
I know this won't be the last time we see each other, but I definitely appreciate you, and I'm grateful that you said yes and we had you on the show. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. We could do this all day.
Yep.
We could do this 4 days, and I would still be thrilled. So thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. Be well.